I want to just really leap ahead. We talked about the image of Israel at its foundation, when people would, on the left, would get around and sing, saying that, and all the lovely Israeli songs of liberation. Nobody does that now. Nobody comes close to doing that now. Look what has happened to it, all right? Look at the degeneration, which is built into the logic, the unfolding, if you like, of the disease that is Zionism. Look at the economics of it. Once the most equal nation in the world, would you believe that Israel now has the highest inequality of any nation in the Western world, the greatest difference between the wealthiest and the poorest? And this has to do with the fact that it never was really a socialist country. It was a national socialist country, and in order to survive and thrive, it had to become the instrument of U.S. imperial power in that region. That is a necessity, and that continues to be the necessity. And so Israel became a mini capitalist imperial power, mostly casino capitalism, very little in the way of actual investment or true productivity, except for the making of weapons of death and destruction. And with it all, this kind of ever-growing corruption that seizes this nation. Now, there are reasons why it has gotten so much worse. And I'll just tick some of them off, and then I'll turn to the larger political issue and sit down, because there's much more to be said here than I have time to say. In part, it's the result of sort of the internal logic of illegitimate power. Sometimes I think that Israel is the Macbeth amongst nations. It kills in order to get power. It's considered a loyal, trustworthy servant. But because it has to hold on to the power, it has to kill and kill again. And as it does, it undergoes this kind of deep corruption, moral degradation. But that's a bit too general. I mean, there's actually other factors here. One, of course, and the most important, is the impunity given to it by its great imperial patron. This is our problem in this country. This is why I chose to say no to what Bard College was doing to me, because that's part of the impunity mechanism. This is what our responsibility is, to break that logic of Israel's impunity, which is grounded in these very powerful institutions, which can be called the Zionist lobby or the Zionist power structure, or whatever you want to call it. It's very real, and it's growing in intensity. And the reason it's growing in intensity is because Israel is now approaching a kind of state of moral degeneration where it is losing the affections that it once had amongst the Jewish people themselves. And this is a very active and dynamic process. As it gets more corrupt and more nihilistic, shall we say, the Jewish people whose destiny had depended upon it become increasingly unable to find a kind of home there. And it's very important, because it's very difficult to be Jewish in this world, and Israel seemed to present a kind of way in which Jewish identity could be found in a coherent way. But that is not happening anymore, and you're seeing with the invasions of Gaza and sort of the, not the supreme, but the furthest reaches, which leads to an ever rapidly degenerating moral equation. Okay, and what's happening there is that increasing numbers of Jewish people are now turning away from Zionism, and the logic of Zionism itself is coming undone. And you can see that this can be a very rapid transformation. And this is one of the things that's going on, is that the Zionist lobbies are beating the drums ever more strongly, because they are afraid that they are losing out. And I think they are losing out. But a wounded beast is the most dangerous beast. Let me mention a few other things that are sort of more close to the ground. One thing I want to say is a Palestinian word called sumud, which is an Arabic word, which means steadfastness, which means holding in there, which means not yielding. The logic of the Israeli state is to make life so hellish for Palestinians that they'll give up, go away, say, knuckle under, say, all right, we'll submit to you. And the Palestinians, without being perfect, nobody's claiming that, nonetheless have found within themselves the resources of that kind of strength to have that steadfastness. And that steadfastness drives the aggressor crazier and crazier, okay? Because they will not yield. And because they are fed by this logic of impunity from the superpower and the weapons of the superpower, some of which they're actually testing on the populations, as you know, and things of that sort. So they become increasingly desperate. And of course, what used to be a reasonably left-wing country is now a fantastically right-wing country. It has taken on full fascist dimensions. You must recognize not just the greatest inequality, but you're seeing this ever steady rightward drift of the Israeli state, and to the point where you now have Israel's Hitler emerging on the horizon in the figure of Avigdor Lieberman in the party. I'm winding up. Yeah, no problem. And this, so I wanted you to sense the dynamism. Starts out emancipatory, it becomes increasingly corrupt, the Macbeth of the nations, it moves rapidly to the right. As it moves to the right, becomes increasingly nihilistic. The impunity granted by the United States does not restrain any of these developments, so they become increasingly unchecked, increasingly barbarous, increasingly racist, in that the Palestinian victims are just considered, as Chaim Weizmann once said in 1918, the Palestinians are like rocks in the path of Judea. But that was figurative. But now they really are seen as like rocks in the path of the conquering Jewish state. So one other thing that's broken this down, and this is in a way extremely significant. I stated that the central liberatory mythos of Western civilization is the freeing of the slaves. Okay. And the Zionists rose to power on that myth, okay? And even if they had to, fudge a few things. In fact, they had to fudge a lot of things. The most important thing they had to fudge is the whole myth is just that, a myth. There was no slavery in Egypt, okay? Let's get that straight. That is just made up, all right? The same way it's made up that the Jewish people who conquered Palestine are returning. They're not returning. I'm one of them. No way I was ever returning. I come from the Khazars, and Central Asian never touched Palestine, all right? And yet it's all mythos, okay? And so you have basically an invading force which conjures up a myth of its own authentic grounding in the country invaded. But this is coming undone. It's coming undone very concretely. Even now, there are more and more people entering the country who are not even Jewish, and they're coming from Russia, and more people are leaving the country, maybe 750,000, and the people who are leaving tend to be the more progressive ones, and so the people who are left are the more reactionary ones who are supporting these kinds of odious, horrible policies that we see coming out in Gaza. So you're now actually seeing something which we couldn't anticipate before, because sometimes we used to say, oh, it's like Nazism, well, that's terrible, that's being anti-Semitic, but now people are saying it. Jewish people are saying it. You know who Gerald Kaufman is? He's a member of parliament. He's an Orthodox Jew. He was raised in a very, very pro-Zionist home. He's a very distinguished man. All right, and he, without ceasing to be an Orthodox Jew, is saying that he will have nothing to do with this, that he is seeing the Jewish state turning into a simulacrum of the Nazi state. And that's not me speaking, that's an Orthodox Jew member of parliament speaking. So all of this means a very rapid delegitimation. And as the delegitimation gets very, very rapid, you have very significant shifts occurring. This can take place very, very quickly. It means we're living in a very dynamic time. It means there's a day here is to be seized, because big changes are ahead for the state of Israel, and changes that will, I think, signify a true transformation in the lives of the Palestinians as well, which we can talk about later. Thank you.